Winter, 1976. Western Pennsylvania. The kind of winter that bites through your coat and settles in your bones. In a dying steel town called Brownsville, there's an abandoned hospital on the hill. Brownsville General. Closed down in '77. But before they demolished it, something happened there. Something that the local police never investigated. Something that 3 families never got closure for. 3 men disappeared in the winter of 1976. Tommy Breslin, 23. Construction worker. Son of a union boss. Jake Martinez, 22. Panic. Known troublemaker. And Danny Kowalski, 24. The worst of them. His uncle was the county sheriff. No bodies were ever found. No witnesses came forward. The cases went cold. But if you talk to the old-timers in Brownsville, the ones who worked the night shift at the mill back then, they'll tell you a different story. They'll tell you about the nurse. Margaret Walsh. Vietnam veteran. Widowed. Mother of 1 daughter. She came back from Da Nang in 1971 with a skill set most people couldn't imagine. 3 years in a field hospital. 3 years of keeping 19-year-old boys alive when half their bodies were gone. 3 years of learning exactly how much damage a human body can take and still keep breathing. And in March of 1976, someone took the only thing Margaret Walsh had left in this world. Her daughter, Sarah. 19 years old. Waitress. Saving for college. They found her behind the old Union Station. The medical examiner's report was brutal. 3 suspects. 3 alibis. 3 men who walked free. Not enough evidence, they said. Small town. You know how it is. Margaret Walsh knew how it is. She'd spent 3 years in a war zone watching the system fail soldiers over and over again. But this time, she wasn't going to accept it. Because Margaret Walsh had access to something those 3 men never considered. An empty hospital. Medical equipment. And knowledge. The kind of knowledge that comes from working in hell. What happened in the basement of Brownsville General Hospital between April and June of 1976 has never been officially confirmed. But there are whispers. Stories that nurses tell each other late at night. Stories about sounds coming from the old morgue. About lights that shouldn't have been on. About a woman who learned her skills saving lives and used them for something very, very different. This is that story. And I need to warn you, what you're about to hear is dark, disturbing, and possibly true. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button right now. YouTube doesn't like these kinds of stories. The algorithm tries to bury them. Your subscription means this truth doesn't get hidden. It means justice, even vigilante justice, gets remembered. And drop a comment. Do you believe there are crimes so heinous that the system's failure justifies alternative solutions? Let's find out together. To understand what Margaret Walsh became, you need to understand where she came from. Margaret Teresa O'Brien was born in 1949 in Pittsburgh. Irish Catholic family. 5 brothers. She was the youngest and the toughest. Her father worked the steel mills. Her mother cleaned houses for the rich families in Squirrel Hill. Margaret wanted out. She wanted education. She wanted to be a nurse. In 1967, she enrolled in nursing school. Top of her class. Sharp, focused, compassionate. She met David Walsh in 1968. He was a medical student, anti-war, idealistic. They got married that summer. 6 months later, David got drafted. He didn't run to Canada like some of his friends. He believed in service, even if he hated the war. He went to Vietnam as a medic. Margaret, stubborn as hell, volunteered to go with him. Not with him directly, she couldn't do that. But she joined the Army Nurse Corps. Got assigned to the 71st Evacuation Hospital in Pleiku. If you don't know what Pleiku was, let me paint you a picture. Central Highlands of Vietnam. 1969 to 1970. Some of the worst fighting of the entire war. The 71st Evac Hospital was a semi-mobile facility. 400 beds. Designed to handle overflow from field hospitals when the casualties got too heavy. And they were always too heavy. Margaret arrived in Pleiku in January 1969. She was 20 years old. The average age of the wounded soldiers coming through? 19. But his faces blown off. Legs gone. screaming for their mothers. Margaret worked 18-hour shifts. Sometimes 24. Sometimes she'd work until she collapsed. The other nurses who served there later talked about it. The smell. Blood, antiseptic, jungle rot, burning flesh. The sounds. Choppers. Screaming. The wet sound of a chest being cracked open for emergency surgery. And the futility. You'd save a kid's life, patch him up, send him back to base, and 2 weeks later he'd come through again. Worse. Margaret learned to compartmentalize. You had to. If you felt everything, you'd lose your mind in a week. You turned off the part of your brain that feels. You became a machine. Assess. Prioritize. Trish. Who lives? Who dies? Who gets morphine and a chaplain? She got good at it. Too good. In October 1970, David Walsh was killed in an ambush near Key San. He'd been trying to reach a wounded Marine. Sniper got him in the throat. Margaret found out 3 days later. They gave her 72 hours of compassionate leave. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She went back to work. Her CO tried to send her home. She refused. "These boys need me," she said. "David would want me to stay." She stayed another 8 months. By the time Margaret Walsh left Vietnam in June 1971, she'd treated over 2,000 casualties. She'd seen more death than most people see in 10 lifetimes. And she'd learned something that most people never understand. The human body is incredibly resilient. It can survive almost anything, if someone with the right knowledge is controlling the damage. She came home to Pennsylvania. Pregnant. 7 months. She hadn't known before she left Vietnam. The stress, the chaos, she'd missed the signs. Sarah Margaret Walsh was born in August 1971 in Pittsburgh. Primitive, tiny, but healthy. Margaret moved to Brownsville. Cheap rent, quiet, a place to raise her daughter away from the war. She got a job at Brownsville General Hospital. Night shift, ER and ICU rotation. The other nurses loved her. Calm under pressure. Never flustered. Could handle anything. But they noticed something else. Margaret didn't talk about Vietnam. Ever. And sometimes, late at night when it was quiet, they'd catch her staring at nothing. Eyes empty, like she was somewhere else. One of the older nurses, Linda Kowalski, yeah, same last name as one of the suspects, we'll get to that, Linda asked her once, "Maggie, you okay?" Margaret smiled. "I'm fine, Linda. Just tired." But she wasn't fine. Nobody who goes through Pleiku comes back fine. Still, she had Sarah. And Sarah was everything. Blonde, bright, happy kid. Loved school. Loved people. Margaret poured everything into that girl. Every bit of love she had left. She worked double shifts to afford piano lessons. Sewed Sarah's school clothes. Helped with homework. When Sarah turned 16, she got a part-time job at Lou's Diner downtown. Wanted to help out. Wanted to save for college. "Mom, I'm gonna be a teacher," Sarah would say. "Elementary school. I want to help kids." Margaret would smile. The only real smile she had left. "You'll be amazing, baby." By March 1976, Sarah was 19. Working full-time at the diner. Saving money. Had been accepted to Slippery Rock State College for the fall. Everything was looking up. And then March 14th happened. Sarah finished her shift at Lou's Diner at 11 p.m. She usually got a ride from Lou himself, the owner. Older guy, protective of his waitresses. But that night, Lou's car wouldn't start. Battery was dead. "I'll walk," Sarah said. "It's only 1.5 miles. I'll be fine." Lou didn't like it. "Sarah, wait. I'll call you a cab." "A cab costs money," Sarah laughed. "I'm saving for college, Lou. I'll be fine. It's Brownsville. Nothing ever happens here." She left at 11:07 p.m. The route home took her down Market Street, past the old Union Station, abandoned since the trains stopped running in 1970. Past the construction site where they were building new row houses. Past the parking lot where the local kids hung out on weekends. At 11:48 p.m., Margaret Walsh called Lou's Diner from a payphone. "Lou, is Sarah still there?" "She's not home yet." Lou's voice went tight. "She left at 11, Maggie. Said she was walking." Margaret hung up. Grabbed her coat. Started walking the route herself. By 1 a.m., she was at the police station filing a missing persons report. By 3 a.m., officers were searching with flashlights. By dawn, they found her. Behind the old Union Station, there's a maintenance alley. Narrow. Brick walls on both sides. Dumpsters. Broken glass. That's where they found Sarah Walsh at 6:23 a.m. on March 15, 1976. I'm not going to describe what the scene looked like. Out of respect for Sarah, for Margaret, and for YouTube's policies. What I will tell you is this. The medical examiner's report used words like sustained assault, multiple contusions, defensive wounds. Sarah had fought. There was physical evidence. DNA testing didn't exist yet, but there were fibers. Hair samples. Skin under her fingernails. The detective assigned to the case was a 20-year veteran named Frank Kowalski. That last name should ring a bell. Frank was competent, thorough. He processed the scene correctly. Within 48 hours, he had 3 suspects. Tommy Breslin, Jake Martinez, Danny Kowalski, Danny, Frank's nephew. All 3 had been at a house party that night, about 2 blocks from the Union Station. Neighbors reported hearing loud music, shouting, breaking glass. The party broke up around 10:45 p.m. Witnesses saw Tommy, Jake, and Danny leaving together. Drunk, but let's go find some fun, one witness heard Danny say. At 11:15 p.m., right around the time Sarah would have been walking past, a different witness reported seeing 3 young men in the Union Station parking lot. They were acting weird, the witness said. Catcalling. Chasing something. I thought maybe it was a dog. It wasn't a dog. By March 17th, Detective Kowalski brought all 3 in for questioning. Tommy Breslin's story, we left the party around 11. Went to Jake's place. Played cards till 2 in the morning. Crashed there. Jake Martinez backed it up. Same story. Word for word. Danny Kowalski? I wasn't even there. I left the party early. Went home. My girlfriend can confirm. His girlfriend, Lisa Chin, confirmed it. Testified that Danny was with her from 10:30 p.m. until morning. Airtight alibis. Except the physical evidence told a different story. Fibers from Sarah's coat were found in Jake's car. Scratches on Danny's face and arms. From working construction, he said. And Tommy's boots matched a print found at the scene. But none of it was enough. Not without witnesses. Not without a confession. And all 3 had lawyers. Good lawyers. The kind you don't get on a construction worker's salary. On March 22nd, 1 week after Sarah's body was found, all 3 suspects were released. Insufficient evidence to proceed, the DA announced. Margaret Walsh was there. In the courthouse hallway. Watching them walk out. Tommy saw her. Smirked. Jake elbowed Danny. Whispered something. They all laughed. Margaret didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't scream. She just what? That night she went home. Sat in Sarah's room. The room was exactly as Sarah had left it. Bedmate. Stuffed animals on the shelf. College brochures on the desk. Margaret picked up one of the brochures. Slippery Rock State College. Teaching program. She held it for a long time. And then she made a decision. The system had failed Sarah. The police, the courts, all of them had failed. But Margaret Walsh hadn't survived 3 years in Vietnam by trusting systems. She'd survived by taking control. By doing what needed to be done. And that's exactly what she was going to do now. Inside her closet was an old army footlocker she hadn't opened in 5 years. Her old nurse's uniform. Dog tags. David's dog tags. A medical textbook from Vietnam. Field surgery procedures. Improvised tools. And at the bottom, underneath everything else, a small black notebook. In that notebook, Margaret had kept notes during the war. Not official notes. Personal ones. Observations about trauma. About pain management. About how to keep someone alive when they should be dead. And, though she'd never written this down explicitly, about the reverse. About how to make someone suffer. How to extend pain. How to use medical knowledge as a weapon. She'd never acted on it. Never needed to. But she'd thought about it. Late at night in Pleiku, when another boy died screaming. When the choppers brought in enemy combatants and she had to save their lives while American kids bled out. She'd thought about it. And now she was going to use it. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret did reconnaissance. She followed Tommy Breslin. Learned his routine. He worked construction during the day. Drank at McGinty's Tavern at night. She followed Jake Martinez. He worked at an auto shop. Lived alone in a basement apartment. And she followed Danny Kowalski. The worst of the three. Entitled. Walking around like he owned the town. Because in a way, he did. His uncle was the sheriff. His father was on the town council. Danny Kowalski had never faced consequences for anything in his life. Margaret was going to change that. But she needed a location. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere soundproof. Somewhere with the equipment she'd need. And then she realized, she worked at a hospital. Brownsville General Hospital was struggling financially. Everyone knew it. Whole wings of the building were closed. The old morgue in the basement hadn't been used in over a year. Budget cuts. They'd moved morgue operations to the county facility. The hospital basement was scheduled for renovation, eventually. But not yet. And Margaret still had keys. She started preparing. Late at night, after her shift ended, she'd go down to the old morgue. She cleaned it. Set up equipment. Sterilized tools. She tested the soundproofing. Played a radio at full volume. Walked upstairs. Couldn't hear a thing. Perfect. She stockpiled supplies. IVs. Sedatives. Restraints. She practiced. Ran through procedures in her mind. Anticipated problems. This wasn't rage. This wasn't grief driving her crazy. This was colder than that. This was a mission. A surgical operation. And on April 3, 1976, Margaret Walsh executed Phase 1. Tommy Breslin left McGinty's Tavern at 12:47 a.m. Drunk, but bragging to his buddies about getting away with it. One of the regulars at the bar later told police, Tommy was saying some sick stuff that night. About the Walsh girl. About how the cops couldn't touch him. Tommy stumbled to his car. A beat-up Chevy Nova. Parked in the alley behind the bar. He never made it home. His car was found the next morning, still running, driver's door open. Keys in the ignition. No Tommy. Detective Kowalski opened a missing persons case. Interviewed everyone at the bar. Nobody saw anything unusual. Well, one person did. The bartender mentioned a woman. Lady in a nurse's uniform. Sitting in the corner all night. Didn't drink. Just watched. Can you describe her? Kowalski asked. Mid-30s. Blonde hair. Quiet. Left right before Tommy did. Kowalski made a note. But there were a lot of nurses in town. Didn't mean anything. Or so he thought. What Detective Kowalski didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Tommy Breslin was alive. Barely. He was in the basement of Brownsville General Hospital. And Margaret Walsh was teaching him about consequences. The way Margaret would have thought about it. Tommy Breslin regained consciousness at approximately 2 a.m. on April 4th. He was restrained on a hospital gurney. Leather straps. Medical grade. The room was cold. Concrete walls. A single light bulb overhead. He tried to scream. Couldn't. There was a gag. And then he saw her. Margaret Walsh. Standing at a metal table. Arranging surgical instruments. She didn't look at him right away. Just kept organizing. Scalpels. Forceps. Clamps. When she finally turned, her face was calm. Almost peaceful. Tommy, she said quietly. You're awake. I need you awake for this. She walked over. Pulled up a stool. Sat down next to the gurney. You probably don't remember me. We've never met. But you killed my daughter. Tommy's eyes went wide. He thrashed against the restraints. You're going to confess, Margaret continued. Not to the police. To me. I need to hear you say it. She removed the gag. Tommy immediately started screaming. Cursing. Threatening. My dad's a union boss. You're dead. You hear me? You're fucking dead. Margaret waited for him to finish. Then she replaced the gag. I spent 3 years in Vietnam, she said. I learned a lot there. About the human body. About pain. She picked up a syringe. This is propofol. A sedative. But I'm going to use it differently. I'm going to keep you in a state between consciousness and unconsciousness. Aware, but unable to process what's happening clearly. It's a technique we used for traumatic injuries. Keeps patients calm during emergency procedures. She injected him. But I'm also going to use stimulants. Adrenaline. To keep your nervous system active. You're going to feel everything. But you won't be able to scream effectively. You won't be able to escape into shock. Tommy's struggles slowed. His eyes glazed over. Now, Margaret said, pulling on surgical gloves. Let's begin your education. What happened over the next 72 hours is something I can only hint at. Margaret Walsh had learned in Vietnam that the human body can survive incredible trauma if someone knowledgeable is managing it. She kept Tommy alive, kept him conscious, and made him understand exactly what he'd done to Sarah. She didn't torture him out of sadism. This wasn't about pleasure. This was about justice. About making him feel what Sarah felt. Helplessness. On the third day, she asked him again, confess. This time, Tommy confessed. Everything. Through tears and broken teeth. Margaret recorded it. A small cassette recorder. When he was done, she gave him a choice. You can die now. Quickly. Painlessly. Or you can keep living and I'll make the next week much worse. Tommy chose death. Margaret gave him a lethal dose of morphine. The same thing they'd given dying soldiers in Vietnam. He was gone in minutes. Margaret disposed of the body using hospital protocols. Incineration. The hospital had an old crematorium in the basement. It hadn't been used in years, but it still worked. Tommy Breslin became ash. Untraceable. And on April 17th, Margaret Walsh selected her second target. Jake Martinez. Jake was smarter than Tommy. He knew something was wrong when his friend disappeared. He started looking over his shoulder, changing his routine. But he made one mistake. He kept working. Jake worked at Rodriguez Auto Shop on the east side of town. Every day, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Like clockwork. On April 23rd, Jake's car wouldn't start. Battery was dead. Ironic, considering he was a mechanic. The shop owner, Mr. Rodriguez, offered to give him a jump. But Jake said, "Nah, I'll walk. Need the exercise." It was a 2-mile walk home. Through a semi-industrial area. At 5:47 p.m., a delivery driver found Jake's jacket on the sidewalk. Keys still in the pocket. No Jake. Detective Kowalski was now officially worried. 2 missing persons in 2 weeks. Both connected to the Sarah Walsh case. He started asking questions. Looking at connections. And one name kept coming up, Margaret Walsh. A co-worker at the hospital mentioned that Margaret had been acting strange. Distant. Mechanical. Like she's not really here. Another co-worker, she's been spending a lot of time in the basement. Says she's organizing old files. Kowalski made a note to interview Margaret. But he didn't have cause for a warrant yet. Meanwhile, Jake Martinez was learning the same lessons Tommy had learned. Margaret kept Jake for 5 days. Longer than Tommy. Because Jake was tougher. More resistant. But eventually he broke too. He confessed. Described what they'd done in detail. The recording is... I'm not going to describe it. Margaret offered him the same choice. He chose differently than Tommy. I want to live, Jake begged. Please. I'll turn myself in. I'll testify. Just let me live. Margaret considered it. And then she thought about Sarah. About her daughter's final moments. No, she said simply. Jake Martinez died on April 28th. 2 down. 1 to go. Danny Kowalski knew. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew. Tommy was gone. Jake was gone. The cops had no leads. Danny started drinking. Heavy. His girlfriend, Lisa, noticed the change. He's paranoid. Keeps saying someone's watching him. She was right. Someone was. Margaret Walsh had been surveilling Danny for weeks. She knew his schedule better than he did. Where he ate lunch. Where he bought cigarettes. Which bars he avoided. Danny was trying to stay in public places. Smart. But Margaret was smarter. Danny attended a Vietnam veterans support group at the VFW Hall every Thursday night. Ironic, considering he'd never served. But his father was a vet, and Danny went to support the old man. Really, he went for the free beer. Margaret started attending those meetings too. She sat in the back. Quiet. Nobody questioned a nurse being there. Nurses were always welcome. On May 6th, the meeting ran late. Went until almost midnight. Danny left the VFW hall at 11:53 p.m. Drunk. Stumbling. His car was parked 2 blocks away. He never made it. This time, witnesses saw something. A nurse helping a drunk man into a car. Looked like she was giving him a ride home. Good Samaritan. Nobody got the license plate. Detective Kowalski got the report at 1 a.m. Another disappearance. Danny Kowalski. His own nephew. Frank Kowalski finally put it together. 3 suspects in Sarah Walsh's murder. 3 disappearances. A nurse seen near at least 2 of the scenes. He drove straight to Brownsville General Hospital. Arrived at 2:17 a.m. Demanded to see Margaret Walsh. The night supervisor checked the schedule. She's not on tonight. She called in sick. Where does she live? The supervisor gave him the address. Kowalski drove to Margaret's house. Knocked on the door. No answer. He looked in the windows. Empty. No lights. No movement. He radioed for backup. Got a warrant. Entered the house at 4 a.m. The house was clean. Tidy. Almost too tidy. Sarah's room was untouched. Like a shrine. In Margaret's bedroom, they found the army footlocker. Dog tags. Uniform. Medical textbook. And the notebook. Detective Kowalski read it. His hands started shaking. We need to search the hospital, he said. Right now. They arrived at Brownsville General at 5:30 a.m. Full team. 8 officers. They went straight to the basement. And that's where they found her. Margaret Walsh was in the old morgue, sitting on a stool next to a gurney. Danny Kowalski was strapped to that gurney. He was alive. Barely. Conscious. Terrified. Detective Kowalski entered first. Gun drawn. Margaret. Step away from him. Margaret didn't move. She was holding a syringe. Did you know, she said quietly, that the human body can survive for hours with the right medical intervention? Even after catastrophic trauma. You just have to know what you're doing. Margaret, Frank said, voice shaking, put the syringe down. We can talk about this. Can we? Margaret looked at him. Her eyes were hollow. Empty. Did you want to talk when you let these 3 walk free? When you closed Sarah's case because Danny here is your nephew? Frank flinched. They confessed, Margaret continued. All 3 of them. I have recordings. She gestured to a small cassette player on the table. Everything they did to my daughter. Every detail. Would you like to hear it, detective? Frank lowered his gun slightly. Where are Tommy and Jake? Gone, Margaret said simply. They paid for what they did. And Danny's going to pay too. She raised the syringe. Margaret, don't. Frank stepped forward. If you do this, you're a murderer. Is that what Sarah would want? Margaret paused. For the first time, emotion cracked through her facade. Sarah would want justice. Sarah would want them to suffer the way she suffered. Sarah would want her mother to be free, Frank said softly. Not in prison. Not dead. Because that's what happens if you do this. You know that. Margaret looked at Danny. He was crying, begging through the gag. She looked at the syringe in her hand. And then she set it down. Take him, she said. He confessed. It's on tape. Arrest him. Frank moved forward slowly. Cuffed Margaret first. Protocol. Then he checked Danny. Alive. Injured, traumatized, but alive. Margaret Walsh was arrested on May 7, 1976. Charged with kidnapping, assault, 2 counts of suspected murder, though no bodies were ever found. The case became a media sensation. Nurse goes vigilante after daughter's murder. The trial started in September 1976. Danny Kowalski testified. Described everything Margaret had done to him. But he also confessed. On the stand. About Sarah. The defense played the recordings. Tommy's confession. Jake's confession. Danny's confession. The jury heard every detail of what they'd done to Sarah Walsh. The prosecution argued that Margaret had taken the law into her own hands, that she was a killer. The defense argued that she was a mother seeking justice in a system that had failed her. The jury deliberated for 6 days. In the end, they reached a verdict. Guilty of kidnapping and assault. Not guilty of murder. There were no bodies, and the prosecution couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Tommy and Jake were actually dead. Margaret Walsh was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Danny Kowalski was also sentenced. 10 years for manslaughter and conspiracy. He was the only one of the 3 who lived to see the inside of a prison cell. Margaret served 12 years. Got out in 1988 for good behavior. She moved to Ohio. Changed her name. Worked as a hospice nurse under her new identity. Colleagues described her as compassionate, tireless, dedicated to easing suffering. She never spoke about Vietnam. Never spoke about Brownsville. Never spoke about Sarah. In 2003, Margaret Walsh died of heart failure at age 74. She was alone. No family. No children. But at her funeral, small, quiet, just a handful of people, one person showed up unexpected. Danny Kowalski, the nurse from Brownsville General. Linda stood at the grave after everyone else had left. "I knew," she said quietly to the headstone. "I always knew what you did. And I never blamed you." She placed flowers on the grave. Walked away. Danny Kowalski got out of prison in 1986. He moved to Florida. Changed his name. Tried to start over. He died in 1994. Car accident. Some people said it was suicide. His family never talked about what happened in Brownsville. Detective Frank Kowalski retired in 1985. He spent the rest of his life advocating for victims' rights. For police accountability. Before he died in 2001, he gave one interview. Local newspaper. "The Margaret Walsh case haunts me," he said, "because she was right. We failed Sarah. We failed Margaret. And when the system fails, people take matters into their own hands. Can I blame them? Should I have arrested her? Yes. That's the impossible position we put victims in when we don't do our jobs." The old Brownsville General Hospital was demolished in 1987. They found the crematorium in the basement during demolition. It had been used recently. Forensics tested the ash residue. Inconclusive. Could have been medical waste. Could have been something else. Nobody investigated further. Today, there's a parking lot where the hospital used to stand. The old Union Station is still abandoned. Kids dare each other to go inside at night. And sometimes, people say they see a woman in a nurse's uniform, walking the alley, looking for something. It's probably just a story. Urban legend. But in Brownsville, when someone brings up the Walsh case, the old-timers will tell you. She did what had to be done. And if you ask me, she stopped too soon. The question is, do you agree? So that's the story of Margaret Walsh. The nurse. Vietnam veteran. Mother. And vigilante. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment right now. Do you believe Margaret Walsh was a hero or a murderer? Because here's the thing. This isn't black and white. She took lives. She tortured people. Under any legal definition, that's murder. But those people had killed her daughter. And the system let them walk free. So what do you do when the law fails? When police, prosecutors, judges, everyone fails you. Do you accept it? Do you let the people who destroyed your life walk away laughing? Or do you take justice into your own hands? I'm not saying I have the answer, but I want to hear what you think. Also, and this is important, if this story affected you, if you know someone who's been failed by the system, share this video. Not because it glorifies violence. It doesn't. But because it starts a conversation about justice, about victims' rights, about what happens when institutions we trust stop working. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this. Complicated. And turn on notifications. YouTube doesn't promote content like this. It scares them. They want safe, sanitized stories. I don't do safe. I tell the truth. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to Sarah's story. To Margaret's story. Sarah Margaret Walsh. Born August 1971. Died March 1976. She wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to help children. She never got that chance. Remember her name. I'll see you in the next video.